All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, again, depending on when you are watching this video. I hope you had a great week this past week, and looking forward to another great week coming up. So this is another little weekly recap of what we did in 7th grade math class. Our focus this past week, as I said in my previous weekly recap video, we were going to focus in on the graph and how we can identify the COP, or the constant of proportionality, in that graph. So let's get it started. So we start off the week just looking at a graph like this, and immediately students recognized that this was a straight line, and they said, okay, well, that means that this is linear. Again, using that terminology is and we're gonna continue using that terminology all year to really understand that concept of linear, which is gonna be big for them moving forward. So they saw that it was a straight line. They called it a linear relationship. They also noticed that it went through the origin. So since it went through the origin and that it was linear, they knew that this was showing us a proportional relationship. Since it was a proportional relationship, they knew that there had to be a COP, or constant of proportionality, in this graph. So now the next step, and again, this was our focus, can you identify the COP in this graph? So quickly they remembered, well, each of these points consist of coordinates, consist of an X and Y. And so since I know that each of these points represents a proportional relationship, I can literally pick any one of these points to get the COP, and let me demonstrate. So if I just pick a point, let me just erase this real quickly. If I just pick a point, like for example this guy right here, and get its coordinates, I'm going to quickly make just an XY table. So the coordinates of this point would be X is 24 and Y is 4. So 24 for my X and Y is 4. If I pick another point, let's pick this guy. 30 is my X and my Y is 5. So 30 and 5. Well, if I look at these, I can make these into a ratio. So I could do, and I'm going to do it in the correct order. So I'm going to put the Y over the X, but I could do either way, and I'm going to still find the same thing. You'll see in a moment why I did Y over X. But if I do 4 over 24, I can see that that is equivalent to 5 over 30. Both of these are equivalent to 1/6 in lowest terms. So now for my COP, remember we designated the letter K. In my last week video I talked about that. We designated the letter K for the COP, and we defined the K, or the COP, as Y over X. See, it was smart. So I put it in the correct order right away, knowing that we were going to have to do that anyway. So now in this case, my COP would be, in lowest terms, 1/6. And again, any one of these points, and that was the conclusion that they drew, I could pick out any one of these points to get the COP because they're all proportional. So that is where we started the week. And then, because we made these connections and students were really showing that they were understanding this, I decided, you know what, we're ready to move forward. To move forward, really, we were going to summarize now everything. We were going to look at not only the graph, but we're going to look at the tables and the equations and the graphs and mix them all together. And again, keeping that idea of we want to find and identify that COP and understand what it stands for in each situation. So let me give an example of that. So in one of the scenarios we looked at a scenario like this, and hopefully you can see this. It says a baby elephant nurses for the first 2 years of its life. It drinks about 10 liters of milk every day. So immediately the kids went back to the beginning of the year and they remembered, hey, that sounds like a rate. That sounds like I could write this down. So 10 liters of milk every 1 day. And quickly they remembered, hey, there's a 1 on the bottom. That's a unit rate. Okay, and now they're starting to look back to where we started the year and make the connections from then to now. Now, we are no longer just calling this the unit rate. Now, we are actually calling this my K. This is my COP. So, before all that, the first thing we did is we said, well, we have to define the variables in the story. What are the quantities that are going to be changing? And so we have liters of milk. That's going to be changing. And we have the number of days. And so the next concept, which really goes back to their studies in science, we looked at and we had to distinguish which one was the dependent and which one was the independent variable. So in this case, kind of easy to identify because we talked about days. That represents time. Time doesn't depend on anything. So in this case, the number of days is going to be my independent variable. And the liters of milk, that is going to depend, so how much that elephant drinks is going to depend on how many days it has. right? To be drinking this milk, I guess, or to be nursing. Okay, so now we go back to, remember in my previous slide, we said, hey, that's y over x, right? Well, the liters of milk, that's my dependent variable, that's my y. And my days, that is my independent variable, that is always my x, which we're gonna see relates to the graph. When we graph, we're gonna relate that to my x and y there. So now in this case, my COP would be, here's my liters of milk, 10 liters over 1 day. And so now I've defined my variables, and so now the next step is we went into the equation. Okay, so we identified the COP, now we're gonna write our equation, and again, our equation is gonna be written in this format, and so quickly I could slide in my COP in for K, which would be 10, or I could put 10 over 1, but we said, well, 10 divided by 1 is the same thing as 10, so 10 times x. But also we talked about, okay, instead of using y and x, it's easier to use variables that relate to the story. So we said the y was the number of liters, right? And the x was the number of days. So I'm going to use that L and D's to remind myself that what they represent, because that's going to be important. So now I have my equation. So I got my COP, I wrote my equation. Okay, so now, as you can see here, there's a graph. So now the students were asked to go to the graph. And the first step, notice this graph is blank. So I gotta put some labels on there. Well, a moment ago, remember, I had that x and y, and we identified that that x represented the number of days, and that y represented the number of liters. So now, students could go ahead and start plugging in their values. Okay, so for my x-axis, since we're going by whole days, I'm going to skip every line. I'm going to go by ones. Okay, and I'll just put in a few there. And for days, or excuse me, for liters of milk, it was 10 liters per day, so I'm going to go by 10. So I'm going to make this easy for me. This was a relatively easy to graph to plot because they were nice, even numbers. So now for 1 day, here I am at 10. At 2 days, here I am at 20. And 3 days, here I am at 30. And remember, at this point right here, the origin, 0 days, well, obviously, that means there's 0 milk that this elephant has been nursing. So 0, 0 makes sense in the story. And as you can see, we have ourselves a linear, straight line, linear relationship that goes through the origin. So now we have the equation, we have the graph, we have the COP. We're starting to connect all of those pieces together. And that is where we left off this week with a little assignment that they had to finish up that we're going to correct on Monday. It is looking like test is going to be this coming Tuesday, where again, we're going to be testing them on all 3 of these pieces. Okay, remember I'm available during resource. I'm available on Fridays. I'm available by appointment. If you email me, we'll figure out a time to meet so that I can help you. All right, have a great Sunday, and I'm looking forward to another great week this week. Remember, last week of the quarter. See ya.